It all started with this film camera, a brown point and shoot. Many cameras followed after this, but no matter which camera I bought, I was always chasing that same feeling. That feeling I had when I started taking pictures as a kid. I couldn't find it until... After that, for 10 years, I shot nothing but film. I tried the biggest cameras and the smallest. I shot more than 1,000 rolls of film. And the results just had something special about them. The grain, the colors, the black and white, the development, taking film out of the tank or seeing a print come to life in the darkroom. I'm obsessed with the analog world. I use tape when I make music. I build analog synthesizers. I listen to records. I write on paper. I paint on it too. And I make videos on this. Well, actually... Of course, I have thought about shooting film for my videos as well. And there are people who shoot Super 8 for their YouTube videos, which I find frankly quite a commitment. But yeah, at 80 euros per 3 minutes of film, I don't think that's such a great idea. I already shoot enough film as it is, and I don't really have the budget for more. So how do I get that film look in my videos? In this video I will show you several techniques that will get you closer to a filmic look. I will talk about the cameras to use, the lenses, but also filters and software that you can use to emulate film grain, the film looks, and film damage even, halation, glow, bloom, that sort of thing. So we'll go over the whole thing. So let's start with cameras. The major difference between film and digital at the moment is probably dynamic range. With a properly exposed and developed film, you can get up to 20 stops of dynamic range, which is insane. This is of course an extreme example, and you have to expose it very carefully, develop it even more carefully, and then it will have such dynamic range. But yeah, it's a kind of a specialty application. Most consumer cameras up to like 2000 or something like that will have up to 12 stops of dynamic range. You can get cameras that have 15 stops of dynamic range, but we're talking cinema cameras that cost 80,000 euros. So maybe film is then a better solution. I don't know. So with dynamic range, digital cannot compete, but if you expose correctly and handle everything all right, then you can get away with the less dynamic range, and it really only matters when you're shooting something that contains a window to the outside or something like that. Normally it isn't such a big problem if you have a scene like this. Another major difference is sharpness. In general, digital cameras tend to be slightly over-sharpened, and this is very noticeable when you compare cinema cameras and normal consumer range cameras. The cinema cameras tend to be not quite as over-sharpened. In many cases you can't really turn that off, so you're kind of stuck with it. So in that case, a little bit of blurring helps. So if you want to recreate a film look, then a bit of blur is actually quite good, and the smaller the film format, the larger the blur. Like Super 8 would have more blur and 35mm less. Another difference is the color science, and this for the longest time was my major problem, and I didn't shoot any of digital for 10 years because I just couldn't afford the kind of cameras that had the color science that I found acceptable. I wouldn't even say good, I would say acceptable. Nowadays, 10 years later, it's actually not quite as bad anymore, and I would say that the color science has improved quite a lot, even on Sony cameras. Yeah, shade thrown. I don't really like Sony color science. It's the skin tones that just don't look right to me. But these differences also exist in film, and you will see that Kodak film looks very different from Fuji film. Fuji has much better greens, and Kodak is better in skin tones because they are probably optimized for a different market, since Fuji is a Japanese company and won't have Western skin colors in mind necessarily. So these differences also exist in film, and choosing the right camera that fits the kind of look you want is probably the most important thing if you're thinking about color correction. The film look depends very much on your color correction. What is important here is bit depth, and bit depth means the amount of colors that are being recorded, and you can get 8-bit, which is the old standard, and that's not so great if you want to do color correction. So an older camera might not be the best solution unless you get something that can be hacked to shoot raw. Like for example an older Canon camera, the 700D, the Canon EOS M, the original one. And this is what I shot for a very long time. Well, most of my YouTube channel so far has been shot on a camera like that. And they can be hacked to shoot raw, which is very nice. And they can go up to 14-bit, which is a lot. And you don't even need to go that high. Usually 10-bit is enough so that the image doesn't fall apart when you're color correcting. What do I mean by falling apart? Well, you might see banding in the skies or other artifacts like that. So you don't necessarily need to shoot raw, but it helps. And 10-bit tends to be enough if you want to do a lot of color correction, and getting that film look usually depends on color correction. But yeah, I don't think that nowadays there is any reason to shoot 8-bit anymore, since even phones can do 10-bit. Just choose accordingly and make sure that your color bit depth is alright, and then you're gonna be fine for all the color correction that comes afterwards. One important factor in the film look equation are lenses, and they make a big difference because, well, it's what your camera looks through, so it's really important to the image. And modern lenses tend to be very clinical in nature, very sharp. The background blur is very controlled, so it just looks very perfect in a way, and that might not have the character that you want if you're looking for a film look. That's why vintage lenses are a really good option. They tend to be very cheap, so you can pick one up for 50 euros or 100 euros and try around with it. And it's not a heavy investment, so that's really cool. And if you don't like it, it doesn't matter so much because it's not so expensive. One of the most popular ones is probably this Helios. It's a Soviet lens and it has very swirly bokeh. That is the out of focus blur in the background, and this makes a huge difference in the look and feel that it gives. There are many different versions of this lens. Some have more modern coatings, older lenses don't have so modern coatings and they glow more or have lower contrast. I have one of the newer ones that is a bit more contrasty. If you want similar characteristics with swirly bokeh, then this 50mm f1.1 Voigtlander lens is a very good option too for swirly bokeh. It also has a lot of glow wide open, and yeah, it's a very special lens, but it can be a bit too much perhaps for some people and for certain situations. A great all-around lens that I really like is this Sigma. It's a 24mm lens, and that's a very useful focal range for this type of shot. This is also shot on a 24mm lens, so it's a very nice focal length. This lens has a bit more glow, it's not quite as sharp, and it looks a lot less clinical. And I really like it for that, and I use this as my main shooting lens for a very long time. Probably around 4 years or something like that I use this lens. The downside to these lenses is that they don't have autofocus and you have to sit kind of still. Otherwise you will move in and out of focus. You can't do this. That won't work on a vintage lens, and some people need that, so it might not be an option for everyone. Another downside is that the effect is baked into the footage, and if you later think that maybe you shouldn't have chosen that really swirly lens that makes everything look like you're in a strange dream, then you can't really change it after the fact, and that can be a problem too. So for safe shots, a modern lens is probably the better choice. If you want autofocus on a modern lens and still want to have a bloom effect or like a vintage look to your image, then it makes sense to use filters. The filter that you want to use in this case is either a Pro Mist or Black Mist filter. The difference between a Black Mist and the Pro Mist is that the Pro Mist makes less contrast too. And this makes sense if your lens is very contrasty, and some modern lenses are very contrasty, so then it might make sense. Especially if you don't have a log profile on your camera, then this can help with your dynamic range too. Personally, I use Black Mist filters most of the time because I don't really need that sort of lower contrast. These come in different strengths, 1/8 or 1/4, and 1/4 is the stronger one. So you can choose between those and choose the effect that you want to have. These filters are also sometimes referred to as beauty filters because they also reduce sharpness a little bit, and then you can't see the pores, so to speak, and that sort of thing. And who doesn't need something like that sometimes? The main effect is that they give a certain amount of glow, and you can especially see that in light sources. Around here you might see something that looks a bit more like bloom. With skin tones, depending on your exposure, it also creates a bit of glow, and that helps too. The downside of these filters is though that you have that baked into the footage, just like with lenses. You can't remove the effect afterwards, and you're stuck with it if you have taken the footage with a filter on. And that's one reason not to use them, but I personally use them anyway because I like vintage lenses, and I probably wouldn't want to remove the glow and get a very clinical image instead. But for certain applications, it's probably preferable to use a clean image without any filters and then get the same effects in software. If you don't want to bake in these effects into your footage, you can use software instead. DaVinci has some of these functions included, but today I want to talk to you about a software that I tend to use because it is probably the best I've tried so far, and that is Dehancer. Dehancer are kindly sponsoring this video and gave me this software to try out, and in return for making a video and talking about this software, I get a license, and I wouldn't want the license if I didn't use the software, so it is really great, and that's why I recommend it. I definitely wouldn't recommend anything to you that I don't use myself. That's not how I roll. I rather not waste my time on making a video if I don't actually use a product. After having tried many different film emulations and chasing that film look for 10 years, well, this is the closest I've come so far, I have to say. I really like the bloom effect that it has included, which is the glow that I've been talking about with the lenses and with the filters. That one is really good, so that's really cool. I think it's worth it already for that. But it also has more functions included that are really cool and that I've not seen so well executed in other software programs. I think the film grain simulation is one of the most flexible that I've seen. It can give you grain of different sizes. You can dial it in very fine grained, pun intended. You can also dial in 65mm grain, 8mm grain, depending on what you want to create. It's really very flexible and it looks convincing to me, and that's really nice. I tend to use grain very subtly, and I prefer the 65mm grain. Sometimes I really go heavy too though. And then I like the 8mm grain too, and this is what I used for this segment that I sometimes include. If you enjoy the music in this video, then you can check out my Bandcamp, polarcoaster.bandcamp.com, where you can find my newest album, Hypnagogia, and also my first album, Endless Nights. Both are very much ambient, but Hypnagogia is a bit darker than Endless Nights. So chances are that if you like the music in this video, you're gonna enjoy those two albums as well. So do check them out if you're interested in the music. You can also support my channel on Ko-fi, where there are different membership tier options, and you can get early access to my videos or download the music in them. This really helps out to keep the channel running, because that way I have more time to spend on these videos and I can bring you more of them. Thank you for all your support, it really helps. The film damage effects are equally flexible and they're also quite convincing, and they don't loop, they're not overlays or something like that, they're always generated, and that makes them look a lot more natural than if you use overlays. Before I found Dehancer, I used overlays, and it really bugged me that I could see the loop, and it went over and over and around, and throughout the video I would see the same kind of loop over and over, and it really annoyed me. With Dehancer you don't have that problem, and it generates these really convincing effects, and I like it for that. So both the film grain and the film damage are excellent, and I really like them. Another effect that I really like is Halation, and that is something that I've only seen quite poorly executed in many different software versions. I've shot cinema film with the halation layer removed for many years, and chasing that look is quite difficult in emulation, and I really enjoy that. So if you like a cinestill film, then that is really the way to go. I tend to use this especially on GoPro footage, because it covers up chromatic aberrations and all these problems that you might have in the skies. It really helps with footage that is just very digital looking, like the GoPro footage. One has to say though that in real life, in film, you won't see much halation anymore. In older movies you might sometimes see halations in very low light shots. When you see a car light coming up, then you might see halation, but otherwise you don't really see it that much, because they're very well controlled in modern film. It is a sort of fake effect, because companies have started to remove the anti-halation layer of motion picture film to sell it to film photographers. And that has become very popular, and that's also why this halation effect has become popular too among videographers, even though it's not very realistic in the sense that you wouldn't see that in a movie most of the time. I do like the effect though, and it makes GoPro footage look a lot better, and that's why I enjoy it. So that's what I would recommend it for. If you want a real film look though, then don't put halation on it, or only very subtly in very low light situations. I also think that the film looks that are included, the LUTs that are included to emulate different film stocks, are very, very good. I especially like the Fuji Pro 400H, which is my favorite film stock and sadly discontinued, so I use that one a lot. But many of the different film stocks look very convincing and I like them a lot. You can find film LUTs elsewhere too, but these are really very nicely done and I use them a lot. There are also print film emulations, and there's even an entire color correction workflow and print film emulations and all that in there, so you can use it for your entire color workflow. I use DaVinci for this, but it is very powerful and a completely different way of working, and I really think it gives excellent results. If you look at the price, it looks quite steep, I have to say, but I like that they have the option of paying once and not having a subscription model, and this explains why the one-time price is quite high, because you're not going to be a repeat customer if you just buy the whole version. It is definitely expensive, but you can buy single effects and then use, for example, instead of the bloom you could use the filter and then just buy the halation effect if you like that, or if you only want the bloom, that's also cool. And those are much more affordable. Choosing the one that is most suitable for you will make it less expensive. You definitely don't need all of them to get a convincing film look. You can try film grain overlays too and combine and match, but some of these are definitely superior to whatever you can find elsewhere. And that's why I like this software and why I would recommend it, because it is the best that I've seen. You can make do and get like 80% of the way there, but this is like the gold standard, I would say, of film emulations at the moment, especially if you're getting paid for your video editing work. For example, if you use this in a wedding shoot or something like that, then it definitely makes sense to invest in something that looks this good, because it definitely looks more professional than the overlays and little loops and all that. If you get paid for your work, it's definitely worth the price. I have a promo code that will make it a little bit cheaper for you. I do get a commission on that, so keep that in mind. But you can download a trial version and see for yourself, and then you will realize that it is a really great emulation. I don't normally recommend many products, but this is one that I definitely use myself, and I think it has improved my color grading workflow quite a bit, and no more loops of film damage that grind on me. Before you now go out to buy a new camera and new lenses and filters and software licenses and all of that, there's one thing to consider though, and it has something to do with gear, but not necessarily depending on your planning. And this is lighting. The main difference between movies and the kind of videos that we film is that in movies the lighting is very, very controlled, especially on film. And if you look at old movies especially, they're very, very carefully lit, because the film wasn't very sensitive and it needed a lot of light to illuminate the film. Even nowadays, the fastest motion picture film that people use on set would be 500T, which is an ISO 500 film, and compared to what our digital cameras are capable of, that's nothing. So film needs a lot of light, and that's why in movies the lighting is very controlled. The fanciest cameras and the nicest lenses and the filters and all of that will make no difference whatsoever if you don't have enough light. So think about lighting first before you think about all the other stuff. You can probably get away with shooting with a phone and maybe a little bit of software if you have very good lighting. I mean, let's look at this shot, for example. I have a light here. Looks very different, doesn't it? How about I turn off my other light? So in my book, lighting makes the biggest difference. Now, if you only have money for a nice camera or a nice light, then I suggest that you buy a microphone instead, because terrible audio is the worst and will drive away anyone, and you can have the nicest picture in the world. If your sound is awful, no one is gonna watch it. You can shoot on a 10-year-old camera with a 45-euro lens and it's all fine. I've done that for many years and it worked out fine for me. That's something to consider. You don't need a super fancy camera to do this and to get a nice filmic look, even though it makes it easier if you have a nicer camera. In this video, I've shown you a lot of still pictures as examples for the look of different film stocks, and most of them were indeed shot on film cameras. That being said, Dehancer also offer a Lightroom plugin that can emulate film looks for still pictures, and I smuggled a few pictures into this video that weren't actually shot on film. Can you guess which ones? You can leave a comment down below with your guesses and check your ability to clock a fake by watching my video about the Lightroom plugin next, if it's out already. Honestly, I don't think I could guess if I hadn't taken the pictures myself. My promo code also works for this Lightroom plugin, so if you're a photographer, definitely check it out and download the trial. It's really impressive. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel, so I would really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye!